Our friends, welcome to the channel. Bob here. Welcome to a Starfield video. I'm going to be doing two Starfield videos if I can be asked over the course of this week, probably. Two separate ones, mainly because I kind of wanted to split the topics up so you can listen to them or not. The first video is going to be about the kind of like the political, ideological stuff that's been going on. I know some people don't like listening to this sort of stuff, so you can just ignore it. The second video will be kind of like a review after an updated review after almost 100 hours. But this video is going to be talking about the ideological stuff. It's not going to be very long because I guess, you know, what we all know is that you can't, there is no discussion to be had. But it's interesting how it's all blown up over the last week or so after a YouTuber, Az from Hill versus Babyface, kind of went on a rant about the pronouns. It's interesting because someone on my previous video, someone left a comment saying that kind of it shouldn't really be about the pronouns because the game is just crammed full of modern ideological nonsense, and it absolutely is, and that person is absolutely right. But I think that, you know, certain groups want to focus on something just so they can say, oh well, it's only this, it doesn't really matter. But I think the overall point of this video is that previously I kind of avoided talking about this kind of stuff. Because, you know, we all know through history, this discussion doesn't really work. People don't want to have discussions. Diplomacy is overrated. I mean, look back through history. Yeah, I mean, sure, talking things out can help. If you've got a problem, you know, internally, and you go to a psychologist, maybe some of the things that psychologists will talk to you about, and whatever processes they go through may help you. But that's different to this. It's different when you've got two political sides. You know, you'd hope they'd come together and talk about things and maybe make things better. But that looking through history, that doesn't really often happen. As an example, if you take like wars, for example, diplomacy in wars only really happens when one side has lost, or they've lost so much that they can't afford to lose anymore. So then they come to the negotiating table. We've currently got strikes in the UK at the moment in certain areas. Again, strikes is a very good example. You know, the only time that people ever come to the negotiating table for strikes where it's actually going to work, as opposed to getting together and talking about it for a day and then nothing's concluded. The only time discussions really work, or diplomacy really works, is when one side has just weakened to a point where they almost have to give in. But they don't want to see as though they're giving in, you know, so they come to the negotiating table much weaker. I guess my point is that generally diplomacy only works when, in a political sense, when one group comes to the table to talk to another group, and one of the groups is coming in a weakened state, so they've kind of got no choice. And I think, as I said, this video is not going to be particularly long because there isn't really any discussion to have, you know. As someone who sits in the middle and tries to look at both sides, you know, each side is kind of mired, is stuck in their own ideological bubble, you know, their own ideological group, trench, where they're not going to come out of. You know, they're not interested in hearing what the other side have got to say, really. You get some people, like on my last video, who will say, well, I respect your opinion, but, and then go on to insult you by calling you certain things. But obviously that's not discussion, really. You know, that's just passive aggressive, calling you stuff, basically. So I guess that's the whole point of the video. I'll expand a little bit, but the whole point of the video is that there isn't any discussion to have because we're not capable of discussion. You know, two groups are not capable of getting together and talking about it and coming up with a solution. And the internet is a big part of that, is a big part of the issue, because each of us can go on to the internet and get affirmation, a confirmation of how we feel. Unfortunately, most people only go to the areas where there are people that agree with them for that confirmation. And so they'll go into their own little bubble on the internet, on social media, their own little like voice area where all the voices they're hearing, just the same as what everyone thinks within that group. And so you just constantly hear the same things, and there are people telling you, no, you know, what we think is the right thing, and we're on the right side of history, as they say. And that's actually a term that was used in Baldur's Gate 3. It was hilarious. At first I thought it was a parody, but then I realised that whoever wrote it was serious. And then that's when I knew that there was no hope for this kind of thing. No matter how good the game is, The commentary in it can just ruin everything, and that's kind of what it does for me. But yeah, we're not capable of having discussions. And I go back to a comment that I made in the previous video where someone in my family told me when I was young, don't talk to friends or family about politics, and don't lend them money because it always ends badly. And I think that you can expand that and just to say anyone, even people that you get together with, and you might start talking about something political and it all goes tits up because we're just not capable of having a discussion. And so, yeah, that's it really. On that, for that part of the video, there isn't any discussion to be had. We can't have discussion because we're not capable of having discussion. We're just stuck. We're crawling through sludge in our own ideological bubble, and we're just not. And actually, I say we're just not prepared to listen. We're also scared to. Again, this is something that people try to play down as it's not happening, but it's happening a lot where someone might say the wrong thing. That when I say the wrong thing, it's not the wrong thing, but one side thinks it's the wrong thing. Or something is dug up that they said 20 years ago, and suddenly, even if they were part of that group, now they've been ostracised. Now they're not part of the group anymore. And I think a lot of people are scared as well. But a lot of people are scared to voice opinions that are currently opposing the current kind of cultural trends that we see, which are very, very left at the moment, radically left. And I say that from someone who used to be very radically left. I'm an old bloke relatively to many of you maybe. I'm not sure about people that listen to my channel actually, but in general, like big internet and YouTube and Twitch users. And I grew up in Thatcher's Britain, and in my family it was a sin to vote Conservative. And I think it probably still is. I come from a very poor background, poor working class background, and everyone voted Labour. So even someone from my background, I've got to the age where I am, and I'm seeing what the sides are like, and I find myself apolitical. I feel sad to say it, but I'm as embarrassed by the left as I am by the right. The left has become something that it never was, and it's something that I just don't want to be a part of. And I could never vote Conservative. Not because the other thing I think as well is that everything's become polarized. So everything that is good is apparently on the left, and everything that is bad is apparently on the right. It's got to a point where when people are talking about the right, they're not saying like alt-right or radical right, they're just saying the right, which is stupid really, because when you get to my age and you're a bit wiser, you realise that both sides have some good practical political views. Whether the party that's on the right or on the left is implementing them in the correct way, well, obviously that's another argument, that's another topic, and sometimes the way it's implemented on one side or the other can lead you to believe that everything on that side is bad, but it's not. I don't like people saying the left. To lump everyone in with it as being good or bad, and I don't like anyone just saying, well, just the right, to lump everything in it's good or bad. There's good things about being conservative or right wing. There's good things about being the left or Labour or whatever it is. But that's where we are. We just can't talk about it, and I think probably going forward, it's not something that I'll discuss too much on my channel. It's for the very reason that I didn't talk about it before. I think not just, obviously you can go back thousands of years to discover this. This is not a new discovery that people really ultimately just can't talk to themselves. No matter how much we think we can and how open we think we are, essentially people are not. And I think the internet, I don't think we've ever been, and I think the internet has made that worse because it's easy to get a pat on the back from someone and say, nope, we're doing the right thing. So yeah, going forward, I probably won't discuss this sort of stuff too much anymore. If I discuss anything at all, I don't know. From the start, the saddest thing, it's weird being in the middle because no side likes you. So you've kind of got no friends. Essentially, you're out in the wilderness. But the saddest thing that I think I've come across is that you can't even. So say you're at a meeting, and you want to talk about a subject. So even not giving your opinion on it, just kind of identifying something, is also seen as a bad thing. So you're also seen as a bigot just for noticing stuff. So on the topic of Starfield, let's get back to Starfield. On the topic of Starfield, it's clear that whoever created the game has sat down and said, we're going to make this game basically matriarchal, almost 100%. And what we're going to do is most of the NPCs in the game, whether they're randomly generated wandering around a city or whether they're key NPCs, are going to come from certain parts of the real world. And it's clear, it's, and you're just playing the game, you can see it. It's so obvious that there's a whole slew of ideology behind these decisions, and even identifying that and noticing it because it's obvious, will class you as being on the wrong side. So you can't even identify something and say, look, should we talk about this? What do we think? Even that will bring the pitchfork wielding peasants to your door. Wanting to sort of burn you out. We've reached that level where even if you notice something out of the ordinary, then that's a problem. The thing with Starfield as well, obviously, and all of this kind of stuff, is that there's no world building to the way that you can see that it's all ideological driven is that there's no world building to give you a reason for what's going on. So when you go to do a quest line for a company and all the directors are women, for example, or you go to a mining facility and all the miners are women, and everywhere you go, pretty much everyone is a woman in a position of power and stuff. You can't even kind of notice that and bring it up as a topic. Even when people don't know how you feel about it, you might be thinking, yeah, this is great. But if you just identifying it and bring it up and wanting to bring it up as a topic is seen as a bad thing. You're just supposed to not notice it and get on with it. Now, of course, any of these things in isolation are not a problem. So what if the universe is currently matriarchal? In isolation, it doesn't matter. So what if all the NPCs are from a particular part of our real world? It doesn't really matter. What matters, as I said before, is what's behind it. It's not bigoted to identify something and then try to find out what the reason for it is. Now, what's behind it? And what's behind it are these really, really radical ideologues who want you to see the world in a certain way. They want to push it upon you, and they will push it upon you, irrespective of whether you want it or not. Now, they're a private company; they can do what they want. But for me personally, anyway, like going forward, like I wouldn't pre-order another Bethesda game because I'm not supporting it. In the same way that I wouldn't support a product if I thought that there were white racists behind it, and the only people that you saw in the game were white people. But just because it's one extreme or the other, it doesn't make it better. So I wouldn't support another Bethesda game, and I kind of feel that when another Bethesda game comes out, maybe they'll find it doesn't do as well as they thought it might do. I mean, they went on about Starfield and how well it did, but it did a lot less than Cyberpunk, for example. And also the numbers could be skewed because it's available on Microsoft Game Pass. But ultimately, yes, it's just something that we can't talk about going forward in videos. Maybe I'll pick it out if it seems to be a big thing, but ultimately it's not worth it. But it's interesting that, as I said, like someone left a comment saying the pronoun thing is a small example of what's going on within the game, and they're absolutely right. The other thing as well is that the pronoun thing is not a thing anyway. That's the other issue that I really have, is that these people are not doing it. These people are not making those decisions because they really care about it. They're doing it because it makes them look good in a certain community on Twitter. And this certain community is actually the minority. That's the real issue. And it's always the case when you look back through history with all the fascists and all that kind of stuff. It's always a small group of people, the minority, but they seem to wield such power that everyone is afraid of them and afraid to stand up to them. And that's what we have now, because, as I said, these people don't care. They're doing it for clout. And you can see that by the fact that pronouns actually make no difference within the game whatsoever. Someone, again, left a comment, like from a language point of view, choosing a pronoun in game doesn't actually make any sense. And also, in real life, it doesn't really make any sense, because the only way that, in a game, for example, the only way that you would ever use a pronoun is if two people were talking about you. So you're not part of the conversation. And that doesn't happen in the game. And when it does, well, I say it doesn't happen, it happens occasionally. And when it does happen, they don't use your pronouns. So I was in a conversation with an NPC yesterday, and they were talking about me when I was there, and they were calling me stranger. And there was another. So they didn't say them or he or she. They didn't even use the pronouns. So again, you can tell it's just clout when it's just an option and it has no effect on the game whatsoever. And that's exactly what's happening here. But going forward, what can you do? I mean, I just think that culturally, that's where we are. You can see it everywhere. I mean, I'm not sure about what it's like in anyone else's country, but when you watch television, it's no different. Even advertising. Like advertising is really weird in the UK at the moment because you're watching advertising, and there's a certain group of people who make up quite a big majority of the country who have essentially been excluded from advertising. And it's clear that the advertisers are trying to give you a false impression of the demographic of what the country is. And I'm the sort of person that I'm the sort of person that likes diversity, but I think it should be representative of the demographic of the country, and it shouldn't be skewed one way or the other. But that's kind of what we have. But that's where we are. I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but that's what it's like here. So going forward, I just think that it's probably not worth talking about these things because there isn't really any debate to have because we're not capable of debate in a sensible fashion without calling each other names. And as someone who kind of sits in the middle, you kind of got no friends really. so that's it really. The politics of Starfield has really kind of hit a nerve, I think, in the culture wars over the last week or so. And it's weird. I kind of feel I kind of agree with both sides, and I guess that's kind of a bit sitting on the fence. But I listened to that rant that Az from Hills versus Babyface had, and I kind of agree with a lot of what he said. But whether I agree with the tone of it, I'm not sure. But I agree with a lot of what he said. But I also want to see diversity in a game, but I want it to make sense. I want it to make sense from a world-building point of view, and I don't want people behind the scenes just putting it in because they want a pat on the back from their group, their hive mind, and that's exactly what's happening. But there you go. It's just one of those things, and we'll carry on going and see where we are. The other thing as well is that what also happens as well is that art or adaptations or original creations that are not very good at the moment are suddenly becoming quite good, and that's the issue as well. Our standards are falling. Like I've seen a lot of praise for One Piece on Netflix, and I suffered an episode and a half, and I just couldn't watch it anymore. Outside of the fact that obviously that the world building demographically is typical what you'd expect from Netflix in 2023, makes no sense and completely takes you out of the world. And I must confess that maybe this is something that affects me more because I'm really into immersion. It's one of the most important things. But I thought that the writing, the directing, the acting, and also the characterization of the characters and casting choices were just terrible. But people are praising it openly, I guess because it's not as bad as what we're used to, maybe. That's the other scary thing as well. You see, it was interesting from a Baldur's Gate 3 point of view where culturally, we've gotten to a point where, and creatively, we've gotten to a point where a developer can come up with a game and other developers are going, oh, this is not fair, because they and we have become so used to dealing with mediocrity and to playing and watching mediocrity that anything that comes out that is got some great design, irrespective of what you think about the politics, is seen as a bad thing by other creatives because they've been able to get away with not being particularly creative, or they've been able to get away with actually not being creative full stop, and they're in their position not because they're talented but for other reasons. But anyway, that's where we are. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying the coverage of Starfield. I know it's probably not what a lot of people want or what you're interested in, but as I said, it was something that I was interested in and I wanted to talk about, but now, well, maybe I'll get back in the box. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon.